Hi everybody, Dr. Kennedy Venekamp here at the Skinny Up Labs in the beautiful Rockies. I wanted to talk to you today about artificial sweeteners. If you're eating anything or drinking anything and putting the little blue packets in, little pink packets, little yellow packets as a sweetener, I want you to know that you're doing yourself a serious disservice. People don't realize that those sweeteners are actually they're a chemical. They're something that the brain doesn't really recognize as what it is. It's kind of tricking the brain, so to speak. If we think about sugar and we add that to like tea or coffee or whatever we add it to, and let's call that X. Okay, let's take a teaspoon of sugar and put it into something like some coffee. That's going to be 1X or 1 teaspoon. When we do a similar amount of an artificial sweetener like, there's NutraSweet, something like that, okay? The body doesn't sense that sweetness the same. And when we first have that taken into our bodies, we'll oftentimes say, wow, that tastes like metal, that tastes funny, that doesn't taste right, it doesn't taste like anything you really want to taste again. But the odd thing about it is that there's a little kind of a back end to it that happens, a back end feeling. The brain senses that, okay, it's metallic tasting, but it's sweet. And when I said that 1 teaspoon of, let's say, sugar is 1X, the body takes that same amount of sweetener and the brain senses that as 1200X. And that's what people have been missing. When I take a Diet Coke or Diet Pepsi or Diet Dr. Pepper or whatever, I look on the back of it and it's got nothing but zeros, my mind automatically, and it's been marketed to us this way, my mind automatically says nothing but zeros. 0 carbohydrates, 0 fat, 0 protein, the only thing in there is sodium, We think we can go ahead and drink as much as we want. And that's really what's happened over the last, I would say 40 to 45 years since we've introduced these artificial sweeteners into our basic American diet. And that's where we get tricked. And that is one of the basic reasons that America is experiencing an obesity climb and increase that we've never seen in the past. If you go back to, the 50s or 60s or even the early 70s and look at just television or whatever, there were no big people, the housewives, they didn't have to have a special workout room, or they didn't have to have a P90X playing, or any of these things with Christy Brinkley or Chuck Norris or any of those things, because they all had little waists just like that. The reason is because they made all their own food. There were not all these additives and preservatives that we have now in the typical American diet. And I just had a gal in this morning who lost 75 pounds on Weight Watchers. And she was really taking in a lot of Diet Coke, because that's kind of legal on that system. Her Diet Dr. Pepper was her weapon of choice, I guess we'll call it. And she started having weird facial tics. She started having odd stomach issues. She began to get very ill, and they couldn't figure it out and never have figured it out. She started having, they thought she had Guillain-Barré syndrome, which is a viral infection of the central nervous system. Very serious. You'll have kind of weird tics, and it'll mimic polio. She went through $14,000 worth of tests, MRIs, CT scans, nerve conduction tests, electromyography, all of these different types of testing, trying to figure out what was wrong with her. And the bottom line is they never did figure out what the problem was. During that time, of course, after she had lost all that weight, she was so depressed and stressed out and everything else, she of course went right back to her triggers, and she began to trigger all this eating and she came in this morning going, Dr. Venekamp, is there any way I can have some help with losing this weight? I have a friend here with me who's just done really well in just 20 or 30 days, and we'd like to get started. So I started to interview her a little bit more, and we said, so did you ever come to the realization that drinking all that Diet Dr. Pepper was a trigger? She says, we're just starting to think that maybe that might be it. It's a neurotoxin. These things are neurotoxins. Another thing that she really ate a lot of was she always had a stick of gum in her mouth, she said. She was constantly chewing whatever, extra or dentine or whatever, but it's got artificial sweeteners in it. So the big idea today is I want you to really watch. Obviously we don't want you on sugar, we don't want you on high fructose corn syrup, things that have things like dextrose, maltodextrose, MSG, you know, the labels are really confusing. Since we started making people list what's in the product, and now we've started to figure out, well gosh, this is the sweeteners and the sugar and the carbohydrate content are really what are adding to the fattening of America. They're starting to trick us, because initially we said, well gosh, if there's a sweetener and that's the first ingredient on the list, then we know that there's a lot of that in there. Well, now they break it up and they put it all the way through all the ingredient lists. So you might have sugar, you might have high fructose corn syrup, you might have all kinds of different things in this product, but they'll break it up and kind of hide it down here and hide it down there, so you don't, it's like you're too tired to get all the way to the bottom of the ingredient list on a can of something. So with that in mind, understand that when we falsely have this sweet effect in our brain, what it does is it lies to our brain stems, okay, and it lies to the amount of insulin that the brain is being called upon to, you know, it's asking the pancreas, please produce all this insulin because we have all this sugar coming. Remember I said 1 teaspoon is like 1x? Well, 1 teaspoon of artificial sweetener is 1200x. Well, the body understands how to handle a teaspoon of real sugar, and it produces enough insulin, which is the mother hormone of the body. It runs every other hormone. It is the dominant hormone. When we have that happen, and the body says, okay, I can handle this, and I'm going to squirt out this much insulin, pancreas is saying that, and we're going to have the body go ahead and use that properly so the cells can function again. We don't have any sugar in the bloodstream because it is able to go into the cell well. With artificial sweeteners, when you have a 1200x rush, the pancreas goes, and it starts squeezing, and it's like, oh, 1200x, geez, I need a 3-gallon pail full of insulin, not like a tablespoonful, okay? And the body becomes swollen, basically. You have what we call a cortisol storm. You have so much insulin that's just floating all over the place, and there was never any sugar. And that's the big lie. When you have all this insulin, but there is no actual sugar, because it was the idea of sugar, it was an artificial sense of sugar that was being told on this story, then the body goes into stress. And as soon as it stresses, it begins to hold water. As soon as it holds water, cortisol goes up. Cortisol is the stress hormone. As soon as that starts to happen, we have a thing called adrenal exhaustion starting to happen. When we start to become adrenally exhausted, it starts to cause the thyroid to not feel well and not operate well, and it sucks all that energy out of the thyroid. We'll go to the doctor and say, gosh, I'm tired all the time. I maybe have rapid heartbeat, I may have thin fingernails, I may have thinning hair, I may have, you know, skin issues or whatever. And it all started because I started to make these decisions towards all these cans that have nothing but zeros on the back because they're filled with artificial sweeteners. So that's making a nice long story not very short, but I'm glad to tell it to you today, and I hope you got something out of it. And just remember, the diet industry is manipulating us. We are being marketed to very heavily, and just because it tastes so good, your body doesn't initially believe it, but the more you give it, the more it buys in, and the more the lie continues. So that's enough for today. Until next time, thank you for joining me. We'll talk to you later.